Hello everyone, welcome back. So this week's adventure was dyeing cotton bobbinet. And believe it or not, in the over 15 years I've been sewing, I have never had the opportunity to dye fabric. So this was my first go around and it went really well, and I will share with you how I did it. Now, before we start, I am going to mention all the supplies. Here is the list of them, and I bought them all from Dharma Trading, who I recommend very highly. And all the instructions I took from their website, and I am just going to be repeating them to you as I understood them, and they worked out very well for me. Now here I am starting by washing the fabric in about 1/8 of a cup of Synthrapol, which is a special textile detergent that removes any oils, fingerprints, dirt, anything that might be on your fabric that will cause your fabric to dye unevenly. Now I washed mine by hand in the sink and then gave it a good rinse in the washing machine. My main reason being I wanted to make sure all the fabric got saturated and cleaned thoroughly, and I don't trust my washing machine to do that. Sometimes it leaves dry spots. After my fabric was washed and thoroughly rinsed, I started to prepare the dye. I began by mixing a tablespoon of urea into some hot water until it dissolved, before adding the dye. The urea helps these powdered dyes dissolve a bit better and a bit more evenly. I'm using number 275, which is hot black. It is a fiber reactive dye, a Procion dye, and this means that the dye actually chemically bonds to your fabric. So once you fix it and wash it, that dye is not going anywhere. It's part of the fabric. And I can attest that once I finished this, I ran it through the wash and I have not had any dye rub off. Now, black is specific. It is a very difficult color to attain, so you actually need to use twice the amount of dye recommended for other colors. So I used 8 tablespoons for my 2 pounds of fabric. And I mixed it. This took some time. Mixed it thoroughly, tried to get all the grit out. You can strain this through Habitai to really get those little last bits of granular dye out, but I felt like I had good luck. I felt like most of it was dissolved. And so I took it, and when I was ready, I added it to my pot of hot water. One thing to note, I actually went a little scant on the water. You should have used 6 gallons for my 2 pounds of fabric, but I didn't have quite enough room in my pot for the fabric and the water, and I figured having a little more concentrated of dye wasn't a bad thing. Next, I added tons of salt, non-iodized salt, and for my 2 pounds of fabric with the black dye, I needed 12 cups of salt. One thing I should mention as I mix in and dissolve all those 12 cups of salt, it is highly recommended that any tools you use for this process, your pot, your tongs, anything you're using to measure or mix, remains in your craft room afterwards. It's highly recommended that you don't eat off of them or cook with them again. Another thing worth mentioning is that I did this in my sink. I did this in my kitchen sink. I wanted the faucet and drain and cleaning materials all handy to me, and it worked very well, and I'm happy to say that my sink wasn't dyed. There was no dye residue. I diligently cleaned as I got black dye on my white sink, but it all ended well, and it was extremely handy to have the drain so accessible, to have my faucet accessible. It worked well for me. And now the moment of truth. My fabric, still damp from the wash, that's important, was ready to be added to this cauldron of dye. Ooh, look at it go. So black. So exciting. Once my fabric was fully submerged, about 20 minutes of mixing ensued. Once my 20 minutes of stirring were up, it was time to add the soda ash. The soda ash helps fix the dye and can also make your fabric a bit darker. I used 2/3 of a cup mixed into hot water to add to my vat. Couple things to note about the soda ash. It is a bit caustic. I could have used a mask, that would have been helpful. It does burn the nostrils just a bit. And it is also what you have to be the most careful about. Now, I mixed it in with some hot water to dilute it. And for this whole process, I used water from my tap, hot water. I have my tap set very high anyway, so it was steaming. I mixed it up, and then what is recommended is that you move your fabric to the side, and then slowly over 15 minutes, constantly stirring, add this soda ash mixture in. I moved it to the side and I added kind of cupfuls at a time. Had I done this again, I would have made a better effort to move my fabric out of the way. When I was done, I did find one spot on my fabric that was a little discolored compared to the rest, and I believe it was from this step right here, where perhaps I just let it get too close to my fabric. So here what I did, cupfuls at a time, slowly added them in, and between each cup I mixed the whole pot around. So learn from my mistake and take your time adding this. Don't be afraid to dilute it further and really get your fabric out of the way. I could have done better with that. Luckily, I only had a problem with one small spot. And once all the soda ash was mixed in, an hour of stirring ensued. Full disclosure, I would leave it for a few minutes, come stir it around, leave it a few more minutes, stir it around. And after my hour was up, it was time to remove the dye from the bath. And I started by ladling out cupfuls of the dye and rinsing my sink until it was light enough for me to pick up and dump out. The next step was to add more hot water and the dye fixative. It's a liquid fixative, and I added 2 ounces for my pot of water. And this just helps fix the dye to the fabric. And then, of course, another hour of stirring began. So luckily, once that hour was up, it was the end of the stirring, and you can see that it's gotten dark out from my window above the sink. Once it was all drained out, the final step was to throw it back in the washing machine, again with the Synthropol detergent, give it a good hot wash, and I hung it up to dry. All in all, it was a lot of work, very time consuming, but it did save a lot. The white bobbinet, which I also got from Dharma Trading, was about $5 a yard, where any professionally dyed black bobbinet I was able to find online was between $30 and $40 a yard. And it also gave me the opportunity to venture into dyeing. I think it worked well, it ended well, and thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope it was easy to follow, and if you want to give it a try, let me know. Have a great day, guys. Thanks for watching.